and this is our last session of the International Campus 24. And I'm happy to welcome Sven Saar, who is in the UK. He has a Waldorf teacher education from Witten Annen Waldorf Teacher Institute. Is a long-time Waldorf teacher from the UK. Originally, he comes from Germany, and he's a well-known author and a really well-known international lecturer and speaker. And I can say that all my students from Alanus University, they are very much happy with his seminars. So I'm very happy to welcome you for this last session of the International Campus. And Sven Saar is speaking about teaching as facilitating, stepping away from the board. Please start your lecture, Sven.
Thank you very much, Jost, and welcome to all of you. Good evening. Thank you that you're all here. This is the fourth time I'm speaking, and it's the second time I'm speaking last. And that means that I'm always kind of thinking, what happened before me, and to what extent can I honor and appreciate those people who shared their thoughts with you in beforehand. So I will refer to a few of my colleagues here as well. I will share my screen with you, and you will see the title and an image there. So the image won't be there for a long time, but I'd like you to hold on to the association that you have with it. So if you watch this little girl, um, what does it engender in you when you see that picture? What do you associate with it? What comes up as you put yourself maybe even into her shoes? I would like to focus on the title of the lecture series, What We Can Do Better. And several of my predecessor speakers have referred here and there to the question that we're held back to some extent by things that we've developed. So the kind of things that we sometimes pride ourselves on, the kind of things that we even like to associate very prominently with Waldorf education might be the very things that are stopping us from moving into the future. I think Christoph referred to this some time ago as garden decoration. So I want to focus a little bit on those kind of things today. What are the things that are stopping us from placing the child at the center of what we do? And what could we do about it? So one of the things that Waldorf education does really well is to educate children without forcing them into a particular role. Where previously education had always had an agenda, be this in society, be that for your parents, be really successful or else you don't count for very much. What we tend to do is to say, grow into yourself. Develop on your own terms. Luciano Pavarotti once said, the older I get, the more I resemble myself. And that's a wonderful thing to do, that you grow into yourself with the help of the people who are around you. But of course, what that means is that we need to get used to teaching from the future. If we teach from the past, or even if we teach in the here and now, we don't quite acknowledge the fact that every human being, and especially a young human being, is somebody who develops towards something. And this element of teaching from the future requires, I think, mostly three qualities. The first of those is that we give the child living concepts that will grow and develop with the individual and with society. That sounds like a nice platitude, but do we actually do that? So if you're like me, born in the 1960s, the world of today is a substantially different one. It's not just technology, it's societal values. The image of gender, for example, the self-image of myself as a boy that I grew up with in the 60s and 70s has substantially changed today. And I can say from my own biographical experience that the education that I had did not prepare me for being an old white man in Middle Europe in 2025. This is very hard work now for me to embrace all the things that society has embraced almost in my absence or without me. So this was an example for growing up with dead concepts. Boys have to be like this and that. And one thing that we might want to avoid in the future. How do we give children concepts that will grow and develop with them and with their environment? Secondly, I think our task is to help the children develop a lifelong warmth relationship to the learning process. I want to remind you, if you have ever seen it before, of an animated movie called Wall-E, which came out in 2008. That means its concept is probably about 20 years old. It was a Pixar movie in which the Earth had been abandoned by human beings because it was no longer livable, and the Earth was full of rubbish, and the human beings were living in space stations in orbit. And in that place, humans were floating around on weightless lounges, and each of us had in front of ourselves a screen, which was floating in the air, a holographic screen. And there was no need anymore to move from that floating lounger because everything was possible to achieve at the drop of a button. We don't even need to turn our heads in that world because everything is in front of us. And our fingers are gradually beginning to turn into toes because we no longer do anything with our hands, with the exception of our thumb, which we use to make our choices, our consumer choices. Why am I telling you this? Because this dystopian or utopian, depending on your viewpoint, vision of the future is set in 2085. Now, if you consider the ages of the children that we teach right now in school, it's quite reasonable to assume that in the year 2085, not only will they still be living, they will probably be still economically active. They will be still contributing to society in 2085. Will they live in a world like that? Or will they live in a post-industrial world where everything has collapsed and people go back to being hunter-gatherers? Or will they live in a wonderful new world because we've managed to get the corner and to have an ecologically aware environment? The jury's really out for us at the moment on this. Um, but chances are that these young people that we teach in our schools now, when they're your age and my age, they will be living in an environment that we can't even imagine right now. So what can we give them in order to prepare themselves for that? And the answer is clearly not content, not even values as much as that, but maybe the ability to change, to embrace new opportunities. Oh, good, I get to change. Oh, excellent, I can learn something new. That's what I mean by the warmth relationship. Something new comes, and my intuitive reaction to it is a positive one, a sympathetic one, Steiner would call it. And finally, there are three qualities I think that human-centered education will be very predisposed to engendering. The first one is resilience, and by that I don't mean our ability to defend ourselves, but more the knowledge of who we are and where we stop and where our environment begins. In order to be resilient, I have to know who I am, what I am for. I have to individuate into myself. Secondly, I need the confidence to use that knowledge and pursue my aims, to follow my calling, um, to respond to my vocation. That requires the ability to say, yes, I know how to do this. yes, I I want to leave an imprint in the world, in my environment. And so that that doesn't become an ego trip at the cost of everyone else, I need that third quality, which is compassion. I need to be aware of the needs of everybody else around me and also of the effect that my actions might have on those. So these are all things that need to play a role in the school environment right now, as I'm teaching and as the children are learning. Um, but they all are there because they will grow with the child. They will develop with the child and become their assets as they go towards this future. The little girl from the opening image. I don't know what you felt when you saw her first. This is a real life situation. I know when this image was taken. It's not from the internet. It's a little girl in an English Waldorf school. And in this school at Michaelmas time, they go into the garden, grade three go into the garden, and they make a dragon out of compost. So they take the old compost and with their bare hands, they pick it up, they turn it around, and they model together a huge big dragon. And because it's a freshly turned compost, it's very hot on the inside, and so the dragon's mouth then begins to steam. This is part of the image, and it's they always love when that happens. But inevitably, one or two of the children get the idea when they've got this mud, this compost mud in their hands, that you could do more things with it than just sculpt something. And this picture was very fortunately taken just at the moment when one of them shaped their compost into a ball and lobbed it at this little girl and said, "Here, catch." Now, what do you think's going to happen? Well, I can reassure you the girl did catch the mud ball, okay? And with very soft hands too. So, what does she need in this situation? Some of you might have already guessed that I'm angling for a metaphor here. I think that mud ball coming flying towards me, that's my future. I've talked about teaching from the future, right? So here is me being faced with my future. Now, I don't have time to consider right now whether that ball is worth catching or not. I don't really have an option here. I've got to catch this thing. And then once I've caught it, I'm going to deal with it. Because if I don't catch it, what's it going to do? It'll hit me in the face. And I don't want that. So I want the future not in my face, I want it in my hands. And then when I've got it, I use my resilience. I use my ability to kind of know what I like, know what I am, to then deal with it. So, for example, I could say, I like compost, I like mud, and I'm really good at throwing, so I'm just going to lob this right back at you. Or I might say, I hate getting my hands dirty, I really don't want to connect with this, and I put it down and I go and wash my hands. Either way, I'm going to make a decision out of that self-awareness, out of my self-image. I will know what to do with this thing. And then comes the third step. What about the person who threw it at me? This is where compassion comes in. Of course, I can then hurl myself at that person full of anger and upset and start beating them up, and then the teacher has to separate us. Or I could maybe ask myself, why did that person just throw this? Was it a prank? Was it aggressive? Was this person maybe just terribly, terribly bored? Is this person secretly in love with me? In other words, I'm going to um, try and use my imagination to get a picture of this other person on their terms. What made them do that? Not just act out of my own pain, out of my own surprise, but to to step away from the situation sufficiently that I can see the other person. This is what I mean by compassion in this case. So I think what you're getting from this is this real passion we have in our movement for child-centered education. I've hardly talked about subjects or content at all up to now. And I think we've missed a few opportunities in the last 10 or 20 years that we could have used to make ourselves better at this. And I want to just highlight a couple of those. And then I will move on to something that I find is well worth embracing, future experiments, I call them, but they're probably more than just experiments. They're inspirations. I want to share with you an image that has never left me ever since I came across it. And then I want to talk about happy teachers. So this is where we're going with this today. So first of all, we all know who this is. I don't actually know if Christoph is here tonight, but uh, in 2010, he published a very profound article, an article that should have started a revolution, I think. Um, Lisa is going to put the address into the in fact, she will put the PDF of this journal into the chat because I'd like you to read this if you've never seen this before. Um, in this article, of which here we have a little bit of a short version, he questions the validity of the concept of the threefold main lesson. So the main lesson has a thinking part, a feeling part, and a willing part. Many of you will have heard that kind of reference. And as Christoph is, he went through this and he found absolutely nowhere in Steiner's work where that threefold division can be justified. And yet it has been taught in uncountable sessions in teacher training centers. And it is very well established in the world of practice everywhere. And in this article, Christoph argues that to spend the first 30 or 40 minutes of a morning lesson jumping about and doing one song after another, and then more recorders, and then more poems, and so on, will make children tired. Instead, he argues for a much more subtle, sophisticated approach to creating our morning. And this is, after all, this is the journal from the pedagogical section, right? We should all, or at least half of us should have at some point read this. And yet I go into school after school after school and I don't see any of this. In fact, people don't even know about this. And I can't understand why that is. Well, I have a theory about it, but so this was, as far as I'm concerned, a really missed opportunity. And I don't miss an opportunity to tell students about this because I think it's a very future-proof article that he wrote there. The second thing is even bigger. And I've talked about this in this space before, so I will keep this very short. What we're looking at here is not a learning environment. The traditional classroom is a stage for broadcasting. And from this stage, the teacher can broadcast their wisdom all over the class. And we have the students in the first row who've got the expensive seats. And the further back we go, the more the pupils are disenfranchised, are disabled by all those disturbing and distracting factors they have to filter out. This is really not an ideal shape at all for connecting with learning content, unless that learning content is on the blackboard, the teacher's pointing to it, and the classroom environment is super quiet. In schools where I go, 90% of rooms look like this, and 90% of the classes happen in this environment without any kind of change. And 1999, so over 25 years ago, the Bochum School in Germany had a pioneering impulse to change something about this, which they called the moving classroom. Many of you will have heard about this. I've talked about this in the past here. And it's all about movement initially, isn't it? About different kinds of furniture, about bringing movement back. You know why I call it a missed opportunity? Because nowadays, I think between 40 and 50% of German Waldorf schools say, oh, we do this. But what they mean is our class one and our class two do it. They have benches instead of chairs. They don't have tables anymore. So we're a school who does the moving classroom. And then I ask, what happens in middle schools? And how do you do it in the high school? And they say, oh no, that it doesn't belong there. And that's such a patronizing attitude towards something that had so much potential. It had the great potential of coming away from this sage on the stage environment and leading us, yes, maybe past different furniture and so on, to teaching with the content at the center of the class. This is my favorite classroom shape, what you're seeing here. And I've maintained that in my class until class 8 because I was so convinced that this is the right way of doing things. Basically, we're all sitting in a circle and our desks are behind us. So either metaphorically or literally, the classroom content is in our middle. In a science demonstration, everybody can see what's going on. And then when the pupils have to write something, all they have to do is turn around and they're now facing the wall or the window or something like that. And they can concentrate on their writing without distractions. When I want their attention, all they have to do is turn back again. And there's multiple other ways we can use this principle of the moving classroom um, with the idea of adjusting the classroom geography to what we're doing, making the child's learning experience the most important thing here. And why would we limit that to a certain age, 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds? I think this idea of adjusting the classroom geography so that a maximum amount of learners can get the maximum benefit from the lesson. That's just common sense, right? That doesn't even stop at children. The same thing would apply to adults, to be honest. Um, and quite often, of course, in teacher training centers, we do sit in the circle when we have something important to talk about. So why wasn't this picked up? I teach this. Lots of my colleagues teach this way at Alanus in Stuttgart, in my institute here, in Rudolf Steiner College in Sydney, in all kinds of places that I know about. We don't teach old stuff anymore. And yet, in schools, I don't see it. Have you ever come across this book? Understanding Child Development. So Angelika Wiel, Wolfgang Auer, the original German authors. Wolfgang Auer is the name with whom the moving classroom impulse is most associated. He's the pioneer of this. This is a book that came out in English in 2020, Weekend Publishing, and I think it's a fantastically contemporary approach to understanding the generative principles, as Martin Rosen calls them, of Waldorf education. So again, this is required reading on our course. Students look into this, and then they come into schools, and you know what happens? They meet experienced teachers there who say, "Welcome, this is how we do things here." And the student might even have the confidence and resilience to say, well, when I did my training, I had these other ideas because Jos Chiron and Sven Saar and Martin Rosen and all these people, they were talking about these kind of things. How about that? Oh, well, yes, they might say. That's not really how we do things in this place. So, and I wouldn't know, I'm not really an expert on that. So, shall we say we play it safe in this first year or two, and maybe later on you can then become a reformer? And before we know it, the energetic, new reforming teacher has been transformed into somebody who maintains the status quo, who plays it safe. Um, and we've missed another opportunity to bring this new element in there. I don't know how many of you were privileged enough to witness Niels Schiemann's um, contribution in the international campus a few weeks ago. He showed a photograph of a young male kindergarten student teacher who was holding a big guitar in the kindergarten. Now, be honest, how many of you inwardly went, oh, 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 when you saw this? What is that? A guitar in the kindergarten? Yeah. I can just hear the kindergarten teachers that I've worked with, that I've met, say, no, 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 we wouldn't allow that. And there are good reasons for having that opinion. I don't want to poo-poo that. But how do you communicate that with this young man who's come with full of enthusiasm, who's brought something that is his impulse? And now he wants to connect himself with this new found school form. Um, if he has to meet a no, how does that no sound? How is he being met rather than just rejected with his impulse? How open are we to practice research? Maybe he can take some of those kindergarten children with his guitar and do with them what he wants to do with them, with the guitar. And then he brings them back to the group. And then he stays. And his task given to him by his mentor is, how are your children different from the children who didn't do the thing with you with the guitar? Let's observe whether we can see any difference in the way they play now after they've had those 20 minutes with you. That would be interesting. There we engage with people, and I think we don't do that anywhere near enough. So the initiative that some people have had, some training courses, I think Hamburg is one of them, Kiel is another one in Germany, have had where right from the beginning of the training, students go into schools and um, the course mentors go with them. I think Niels referred to that as well. Maybe that's the way we can bridge that gap. So this was just, I was very inspired by that. I wanted to share that with you. But I don't just want to talk about past opportunities. I also want to talk about um, something that is in its infancy in a way, but really deserves to be developed. Um, Already for about 5 or 6 years, Martin Rawson's idea of the teacher as a curriculum creator serving three levels has been quite current in our circles, certainly in the adult education circles. The macro, the meso, and the micro level of curriculum. So what's the thing that is um, on the plan now in terms of the child's development? At this point, what content, what approach will aid the development of this child at this age? That's macro. The meso is what's the genius loci? Yeah, am I in the middle of Hong Kong? Am I in rural Germany? And how do I earth this impulse in an appropriate way to my environment and to my society? And thirdly, who am I as a child and who am I as a teacher? And what can we do together that no other combination would want to do? Not the teacher before me, not the teacher after me, you and I. That's the micro level. And I had a really interesting um, conversation just 3 weeks ago when I was mentoring a teacher in Bangalore in southern India. And we were talking about the grade 5 curriculum. And this teacher shared with me that she had introduced her pupils to the history of the caste system in India during the ancient India block, because it's the only time where it says India on the Waldorf curriculum content list. And so we had this conversation about the teacher as a curriculum creator, where I said to her, think for a moment whether you had to do it that way. What is the learning objective of studying the caste system for a young person in modern India? What are they learning about, and at what point should this come? Should it come in the middle of childhood, when you've got this harmonious unfolding of potential? Or could it maybe come just slightly later, when you're in danger of losing your childhood, when nothing quite works anymore and you're discombobulated, and in school you're learning about systems and structures that curb and give boundaries to individuality? In other words, when European pupils learn about Rome and the laws that superseded individual expression, would that be a time for Indian children to learn about the caste system and how it was cemented into place for centuries, if not millennia, to guarantee society's stability? I say that without any kind of judgment. It's all about the history here. And I've also avoided saying the 10-year-old, the 11-year-old, class 5 or class 6, because something Martin Rawson said in his lecture in October really stuck with me. He quoted the Swiss pediatrician Remo Lago as saying, at any given time, the developmental window for a child is about 3 years wide. So in our grade 2, we have children whose developmental age is only just about 6, and other children who are entering the Rubicon phase. Now, if that's true, if that window is so wide, then that blows our concept of a horizontal curriculum completely out of the water. If we say you have to do this in class 2 and this in class 3 and this in class 4, it's practical. Yes, we all make compromises. We can't make bespoke curricula for every single child, but we maybe no longer will be quite so insistent to say to a student teacher, oh no, you can't do that in class 3 because it's too soon for the children. Well, for how many of the children is it too soon? Is there such a thing as an archetypal grade 3 child? So this was inspirational, and this is exactly the reason why we need to create curriculum as teachers. What Martin in his talk didn't emphasize quite as much was the fact that while we may not be able to say that the Rubicon happens at 9 years and 2/3, we still need to assume that it happens. And something comes before it and something comes after it. That is also non-negotiable. Every human being will go through this phase. And again, 2 or 3 years later. So these crises will come and they come in the right order. And when this crisis is over, the child knows, I am here. This is a new meta-consciousness ability. After whether this child is 8.5 or 10.5 is actually irrelevant right now. The child says to themselves, I am here. And immediately comes the question, why am I here? Why not somewhere else? And then that question becomes even more sophisticated. What actually is my here? And the curriculum of grade 4, in most Waldorf schools that I'm aware of, is an answer to that question when it puts local geography or local history into the content part. And there's 1 or 2 blocks that teach the children about their immediate environment. But you know what's the most valuable thing that they will do in those 4 weeks? I hope that many children will do it. Forgive me about the tiny bit of writing here. You don't have to read all of this. I think in a child-centered environment, the most valuable thing that they will do is a description of the place where they live. So they have a project for which they have maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and they describe their house. Is it a one-family house? Is it an apartment block? Who lived in their flat before them? Did they build the house themselves? If there was no house, what was there before? Which is the oldest house in the road? Which is the oldest road in the village, etc., etc. A lot of these things that they have to find out, they can't know by themselves. So what do they have to do? You can't really look that up on the internet, can you? You have to ask people. You knock at neighbors' doors and you say, hello, I'm Tom. I've got to do a school project. Those magical words that open doors. Very few adults close down when they hear the words, I'm doing a school project from a 10-year-old child. They'll say, okay, how can I help you? And so this child will gather information, will record the information, and you know what will happen next time they see that person in the supermarket or in the local restaurant? They will greet them. In other words, they are now putting down their own roots. Oh, yes, that's Mrs. Smith. She told me about what happened then and then. So this is a learning objective, the child rooting themselves in their environment, that is achieved completely without the help of the teacher. All I'm doing as a teacher is I'm facilitating the process. I'm not teaching any content at all, but it also wouldn't happen without me. And this is one of the examples I would give for this thing that I'm calling stepping away from the board. Everything changes if I look at education from the child's point of view. What is the learning objective? What does the child want to learn? And how can I help? How can I facilitate that process? I'm going to give you a break from my voice for 30 seconds or so. Um, Imagine for a moment that you're in grade 4. And in our last English lesson, we've talked about prepositions. And now it's lesson 2 of our preposition arc. And I'm giving you this worksheet with the instruction, dear children, please look. There are 3 possible tasks you can do. Please only do one of them. So I'd quite literally invite you now to have a quick look over this and decide which of these 3 you would choose. You don't have to do all of them, just one of them. So those of you who've got their windows open, their cameras switched on, I'm going to just ask you for a show of hands now. Who of you, and you're welcome to imagine that you're 10 years old, right? Um, who of you would choose number 1? Just put up your hand. Thank you. And who of you would choose number 2? Mhm. And finally, who of you would choose number 3? Great. Thank you. That's exactly what I would expect, right? In a class, different children would choose different tasks to do. Now, this is what we call differentiation. You're no stranger to that. But is any of the tasks harder than the other ones? Is one of these 3 tasks for very highly gifted children, and is another one for the children who are a bit slow? No, they're not. They're just different ways of engaging with the learning objective. If you were my students, I would now ask you to formulate the learning objective. So I'll do that for us. In this case, the learning objective is um, gaining a better understanding of the correct use of prepositions. That's what I want the children to get out of this lesson. Now, there's more than one way of doing this, right? Certain children will want to use their imagination. Other children will want to fill in my gaps. Rudolf Steiner calls them fantasy children and memory children. And I should give them that kind of ability to self-direct, because they will automatically choose the one that suits them best. And that means that's the one they're most enthusiastic about. That's what I want them to have, this opportunity. But I think this isn't where differentiation stops. The next question I would ask is, where would you like to do your work today? And this is something a bit new. And if you are classroom teachers, I'd love you to try this out. I've started to divide my classroom into 4 zones when it comes to self-directed work. So these children have just chosen one of the tasks to do. They've got 10 minutes or so to do it, or maybe 20. And now they can choose 3 places, the ashram, the agora, or the oasis, to do this work in. And that's quite literally move your desk to that area of the classroom. So the ashram is a place in one corner of the classroom where children sit next to each other, but they work silently alongside each other. Nobody talks. Everybody gets on quietly with their work. In the agora, children can discuss their work with each other. They can give each other ideas. They can ask each other questions. It's not meant to be quiet there. Agora is a marketplace. This is where communication happens. The third table is called Oasis, and this is where I sit. I don't wander around the classroom when the children are working. I'm sitting in the Oasis. And there are 3 or 4 children who I will call to me because I know they work best when they're close to me. But any child in the class can come and sit with me and do the work there and ask me questions. Any of these places can be changed at any time. So if a child finds the ashram too quiet because they want to engage, they can move to the agora. If somebody finds the agora too noisy, they can move to the ashram. And there are always one or two children in a class of, say, 30 who really don't want to do any of that. All they want to do is sit by themselves and get on with it. Well, there they go to the hermit's place. They can take their desk and put it wherever they like, and even if it's in the corridor. Yeah. And they're just not into doing things with others today, and that's also okay. The wonderful thing about this system is that I've not yet found a subject for which it doesn't work, and I also haven't found an age group for which it doesn't work. This can go right from class one all the way up to the high school, and it applies to every situation that isn't teacher-centered. And now look at the levels of self-differentiation. Look at the power I'm giving the individual child. The learning objective is still to work on prepositions, but now I can choose how I do that, and I can choose where I do that. In other words, I become the captain of my fate, the master of my ship. I no longer do as I'm told. Yeah, I take an opportunity and I walk somewhere with it and I do it. And I grow into myself. I grow into becoming the master of my education. Um, of course, what you need for this is worksheets. And this is just a little sidebar that I just briefly want to open. I have given quite a few workshops in schools where I've suggested this. And one of the objections I've heard to this is, well, I wouldn't start this before class 4 because we don't really do worksheets before class 4. And I said, okay, what does that mean? Well, in our school, the children always copy from the blackboard until class 5. I say, okay, tell me why you do that. Oh, because it's such a waste of paper if class 1 and class 2 already work with worksheets. And then I asked them to tell me what paper was invented for, if they think that having worksheets is a waste of paper. And they suddenly realized that actually that is exactly the purpose of paper, is you put some information on it and you distribute it, and so that people can work with it and absorb it. This is not wasting paper, this is using paper for its intended purpose. And if I can enable even my 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds to begin to take ownership of their educational process, then I think I've done a good thing there. Um, I was recently honored to be invited to say something at the graduation ceremony of the International Handwork Teachers course. And I'm always very happy to quote somebody who is a contemporary of Rudolf Steiner. It's one of my favorite things anybody ever said about education. John Dewey, the great American cultural hero, said this: give children something to do, not something to learn. When doing is of such a nature that it demands thinking, learning naturally occurs. So not mindless doing, but doing that requires me to think about it. Learning just happens. Doesn't need a teacher. But the facilitation of the moment, the offer, this is what you should be doing, children, that does need to happen. And of course, it applies beautifully to handwork teachers. It should, however, be a transferable skill that we all use, I think. So, I've talked about differentiation quite a bit, and I'm just going to stop the share here for a moment because I now want to change who I talk about. Would it be fair to say that as teachers, as facilitators, some of us are both grumpy and energetic at the same time? And could it be that some others are quite erudite and knowledgeable, but maybe a little bit distant, cool? There are others again which are the life and soul of the party, but maybe a little bit forgetful and unreliable. And a fourth group again is very meticulous, very consistent, but maybe a little bit too predictable. So if you're anything like me, having grown and worked through 4 schools, immediately teachers' faces pop up when you get a description like that. And that's kind of how it should be. There is an enormous strength in this diversity because what unites us all is our love for the child, the common vision that we have. Each single one of us, by ourselves, would be too one-sided to give the child over those 12 years in every situation the thing that they need. The magic only works because we bring our diversity together and we unite ourselves. And this is where this subtitle of the inspirational image comes from. This is a UK story. Um, the great pioneer of UK, of British world of education is Alan Cecil Harwood. He was present at Rudolf Steiner's last course in education in Torquay. He was a 19-year-old chauffeur, well, part-time chauffeur. He had driven the founding teachers to Devon, and then he was allowed to sit at the back of the hall and listen to Steiner's lectures. He later became a pioneering teacher at the first English Waldorf school, and he was the great uniting figure of the Anthroposophical Society. And in the 1950s, he founded, or maybe refounded, we could say, the English movement of Waldorf schools. And he gave it a name that no other Waldorf school national federation has. He called it a fellowship. Now, that's an unusual choice of words. What is a fellowship, and where might he have had the name from? Those of you who have studied the history of anthroposophy a little bit will have heard of Owen Barfield, who was a very close friend of Alan Cecil Harwood. Both of them had studied together at Oxford, together with 2 other people whose names are much better known. Cecil Day-Lewis and John Ronald Tolkien. These 4 together, as a group, they called themselves the Inklings. And of course, we know that Tolkien wrote a seminal book, one of the most famous books in the history of literature, I imagine. And that's the book of first The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings. And he called the group of people who are gathering around the Hobbit the Fellowship of the Ring. This is the title of one of the 3 books in the trilogy, The Fellowship of the Ring. Now, those of you who know the story, and I'm not going to bore you by giving a summary now, know that there is an elf, there's a dwarf, there are human beings, and there's a number of hobbits, and they all come together, and there's a wizard, of course. They all come together for one purpose, to accompany the child, the hobbit, the ring carrier, on their mission. So here we have a being who has a mission. They have to destroy the ring. This is, in my picture, this is the child, okay? The child has something to do in the world. They want to do something. So what do we all do around the child? We facilitate their doing. We help them do that. And some of us are dwarves, yes, and some of us are elves, and maybe some of us are even wizards, but none of us would be able to do this by ourselves. It needs, in the story, it needs these people who don't get on very well, who argue with each other, who are a bit grumpy all the time. Um, Without their facilitation, the Hobbit would never get to the end of the story. And I can't prove this to you, but I'm working on the hypothesis that his choice of the word fellowship for the uniting of the Waldorf schools in Britain was no accident, but that he took direct inspiration here from his friend Tolkien. So, do you remember when Niels talked about teacher shortages that are currently affecting 120 countries? Um, and he gave a possible solution, or no, a possible explanation for this. Um, he had wonderful empirical data with this. If you've not seen this, please watch this on the recording. It's really worth it. And he introduced us to something called the Herzberg hypothesis. It's a dual hypothesis. The first element of that says that our work makes us happy. The second element is the situation in which we do our work makes us unhappy. So if we want to somehow allow modern teachers, contemporary teachers to stay in the schools, we don't need to explain their work to them. They know what to do. They know their work. But what we have to work on is the situation in which they do the work, the conditions under which they do their work. And here I would like to introduce you to another modern hero. His name is Thich Nhat Hanh. Um, Again, another person who, oh, I've given him the wrong years. I'm so sorry. He wasn't quite as young as that. That should say 1926, not 1962. He lived almost for 100 years. My apologies for this. Um, so Thich Nhat Hanh reinvented Buddhism. Buddhism, which normally has as a gesture to withdraw, to disengage from the world. He says, no, no, I'm preaching something called engaged Buddhism. And this slogan, happy teachers will change the world, is one of the things that he brought into the world with him. And he gives for this a beautiful image of the tree in the front yard. Now, imagine you've got a really healthy tree in your front yard. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't talk to you, doesn't walk about, doesn't give you anything. And yet you are benefiting from it in a number of ways. Birds land in it. It produces oxygen. It gives you shade on a sunny day and shelter on a rainy day. It does all these things because it's healthy. And what he says, what Thich Nhat Hanh says is that, and I think he is very well aligned with Rudolf Steiner in this, that being should be the foundation of doing. The healthy tree, just by looking after his own health, is benefiting all the beings around him. So how does that translate into teachers? What's the difference between a happy teacher and an unhappy teacher? Come back to where I started today's lecture and look at the idiom, the idea that the child is at the center of everything. As a child, does it make a difference whether your teachers are happy or unhappy? Whether they work gladly and harmoniously with their colleagues or don't? Does it matter? Should it matter? What difference would it make if we arranged schools in such a way that that becomes one of our credos? Happy teachers will change the world. I'd like to introduce you to a school um, with which my heart is very closely connected. Um, I've, for the last 4 years or so, I've had the privilege of working as an advisor and a mentor with this school. Um, and it's in southern India. It's called Yellow Train School in Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu. And what you see on the picture here are some of the teachers. Now, um, Lisa will put in the chat the web address. Don't look it up yet, but it's well worth later on going to that website and having a look at their website and reading about the history of this very interesting school. Um, it doesn't call itself a Waldorf school, and I will come back to that in a moment. But when you walk through the school, and I've literally just come back from that last week, from spending 8 or 9 days there, you will find these credos on one of the walls. And on the right-hand side, I mean, it says on the left-hand side, it says, we are the Yellow Train children. In the middle, it says, we are the Yellow Train community. And on the right, it says, we are the Yellow Train teachers. And I'd like to read to you what it says there, opposite the office for everybody to read. We are change makers, dreamers and dream catchers. We are artists and musicians, stories and storytellers. We believe in love, magic, friendship and learning. We believe happy teachers can change the world. We are the yellow train teachers. In the morning, the children arrive with school buses and they start to play for about 25 minutes to half an hour in the school playgrounds. And they're looked after by teachers and teaching assistants on a rota. Meanwhile, all the other teachers sit in a circle at the center of the school. And they do a sangha, which is a Hindu word for a traditional ceremony of centering. This is a place it's not a teachers' meeting. They don't talk about important things to be aware of for the rest of the day. They're spending 20 to 25 minutes sharing, breathing together. They begin to sing, and then one of the teachers, and they take it completely in turn, democratically, one of the teachers will share something by reading a piece of literature. It could be a part of a novel, could be a poem or something like that. And other teachers are invited to share on that thought. And you could call this a philosophical discussion almost. And the gathering ends with the teacher's verse and another song. So this happens every morning in this school. Another thing you might want to know about this school before I tell you about other things is that it's only 15 years old. You might not have guessed that from the beautiful buildings that I showed you there, but that in those 15 years, it has grown from 6 pupils to begin with to 745 pupils. Yeah, we're talking 13 minibuses, 13 school buses that arrive there every morning full of pupils. They have long waiting lists and they have a full staff complement. Do you remember when Niels said that all schools with no recruitment problems have good staff relationships? Without exception, he said. I believe him. I can certainly see that here. They have a very interesting system for bringing new teachers in. They call it onboarding. They recruit potential new teachers into the running school year on a full salary. And then they give them induction programs. And they help those teachers to run along what will be their predecessors and work themselves into the job in a guided kind of way while also giving them training. So that's the technical part, the professional part, if you like. But they also facilitate individual biography work. So they have a trained biography counselor, a psychotherapist, who always works with a group of about 9 or 10 teachers who volunteer for this. And they go for a year through a biography workshop program. This started many years ago. By now, many teachers have gone through this, have got to know who they are, have become resilient as a result, and have learned, but through learning about themselves, have also formed a very close bond to those other 9 or 10 teachers in their particular cohort. They have the daily Sangha. And then, of course, in the Indian summer, they have holidays for 2 months. Or I should say, the children have holidays for 2 months. The teachers only get 1 month off in May, when in April, for 30 days, they work together without the children there. Now imagine this in a European setting, right? Um, so they come together and parallel teachers prepare their year plan, their annual work together. So it's very focused from that perspective. They have certain skills training, but they also do cultural things. Like this year, for example, they took a whole week to rehearse a play. They brought a theater professional in, and the whole staff together rehearsed the play. Nothing to do with the classroom, everything to do with creating a feeling of community and of being together. And I just have to mention this last little thing, which I just found so profound. Every day at 12 o'clock and at 2:30, there's a bell. Somebody rings the bell by hand, and the whole school falls silent. All 800 people in the school stop for about 45 to 60 seconds. And you have a moment of mindfulness. And then the bell rings again, and it continues. And every time that happened, when during my days there, I was in the middle of a sentence in front of the children in a mentoring session. And what a gift that was to be able to stop talking just for a moment and come back. So you see what we're doing here is we are in the presence of a group of teachers, of a school organism that invests tremendously into the well-being of its community, including and almost first and foremost its teachers, following this idea that happy teachers will change the world. Um, and you might wonder, why am I telling you so enthusiastically about one particular school? It's because a year ago, I had a very shocking conversation in that particular school. I had been visiting a class teacher in grade 2, and I must admit, I had to admit that that was probably one of the most successful lessons I had ever seen in my whole career as a teacher. I was just so blown away by the quality of it on all sorts of levels. So these were about 28 children who were enthusiastically doing artistic things, enthusiastically doing academic things, devotedly listening to stories. They had all been taught place value, and they had on the blackboard, they had, for example, numbers like 327 minus 192, and they could solve that without writing the numbers underneath each other. They didn't have to put them underneath. They had worked out a system in which to do that authentically. 25 out of those 28 could do that. But what I was really impressed with was the word of the day. Each child had a little journal. And at the end of the day, the children took it in turns to say a word. That word could be beach or grandmother or avocado. And then all those children who wanted to, and it was always more than 20, would clutch their journal, take it home, and voluntarily, as homework, write one page about that thing. About some time when they went to the beach, or about time they spent with their grandmother, or a recipe for avocado, whatever they wanted to write. Class 2, yes? The next day they would come back with those journals, hand them to the class assistant, and during main lesson, the class assistant would mark and comment on those books. And would hand them back at break time to the children. So I remarked on this in my feedback conversation with the teacher, and then I repeated my positive remarks in my conversation with the school leader, the founder of the school. And I said to her, I'm so impressed um, with the quality of that because they don't have to do it. They just love writing so much that they choose to do this voluntarily. I'm so thrilled with that. And then she said the shocking thing. Let me just bring the screen share back. She said, yes, all the classes used to do this kind of thing. We also used to work like this regularly when we were a free school, before we became a Waldorf school. And I said, whoa. So what had happened? Yellow Train School was founded out of a child-centered impulse for reforming and revolutionizing education. Very early on in their journey, they discovered the Waldorf idea, and they found they had a lot of synergy with that. So they brought Waldorf mentors into the school. And at some point, one of those Waldorf mentors said to them, oh no, you can't do that in class 2. That's much too early. They shouldn't be working so hard. It's too academic. It's too intellectual if they write so much. Please stop doing that, they were told. And so they stopped. They took a beautiful piece of excellent practice, enthusiastic, voluntary practice of the children, and they discontinued it because Waldorf didn't seem to approve. And I thought, well, we've moved on since then, I'm very glad to say. Yeah. Um, but it's a really interesting conversation to have with this school, who still don't call themselves a Waldorf school. What value to them might be gained from joining the Waldorf brand or not? And I'll be quite honest with you, as their advisor, I keep moving to and fro. part of me wants this to be a Waldorf school because, to be honest, it's a bit of a pearl in our crown, to have such an inspirational school that would call itself a Waldorf school. On the other hand, I have to admit that maybe they don't have anything to gain from that label, and that hurts me as a Waldorf practitioner of 35 years. Yeah, I want this to be free. I want this to be innovative and reformatory. I want this to be all those things. Um, so I come to the end. Um, I think we need to look at this aspect of things in Europe as well. We can't just keep looking at how do we teach well, how do we learn well. We have to look at the relationship we have to each other, at the relationship we have to our children, and at the relationship our children have to each other. And you will remember, hopefully, from last year that when I talked about sex education and gender, that I introduced that by saying this is about much more than just sex. This is about the way we are with each other. And I published this book called Beziehungskunst, The Art of Relationship. Um, and we've now made a film together with an expert in media studies, Franz Glav, uh, and funded by the German Waldorf Federation. We made a film, a short film, which is there for training purposes. So Waldorf schools can look at this together in their college meetings and then discuss what have we seen. So what happens in the film? I'm just going to put the details in the chat. We went into schools and we asked pupils of the graduating years, 18 and 19-year-old pupils, how was it for you? What was your experience like? Not just what did you learn, but how did teachers relate to you? How did you relate to each other? Um, Tell us about it. And then we recorded them and we turned it into a film. And then this film comes with a worksheet for a teachers' meeting. And the idea is not to say to groups of teachers, this is how you should behave. But the idea is to reflect on our own practice. So if one student, for example, talks about bullying that happens in her class, and teachers in the front carrying on teaching, although they hear exactly what is being said and how that makes her feel. So the question is then in the work materials is, could that happen in your school? And if so, how would you deal with this? So in other words, we're looking at reflexive practice in our own staff groups, and we're asking ourselves, how can we improve not just what we intend to do, but the effect that we're having in our education um, environment. And this is German, obviously. So I've quickly this afternoon managed to make an English subtitled version, and that's available on the YouTube channel that I've put there. That's not on the official German website. So finally, if I manage to care for my well-being, if at the same time I manage to work harmoniously with others, then I'm much more likely to be able to facilitate what I understand to be my task, which is to allow the pupils in my charge to grow into themselves. And I want to introduce you finally in the final slide to a game, which I absolutely love. And if we were all together on a field now, I would play it with you. In this game, there's a small ring in the middle, and a person stands on this, and there are lots of strings attached to this, and the people around walk backwards with the strings, and the person in the middle rises up and begins to hover above the ground. And I find this a beautiful metaphorical picture for the situation, not just of teachers and a child, but also of teachers and teachers. The really hard work is done by the person in the middle. Make no mistake. They have to balance so actively so that they don't fall off this very small platform. But they're also having all the fun. So they're having a great experience because they begin to fly. They wouldn't be able to do that without the facilitation from the outside, but no one person would be able to lift them in this way. It really needs to be all of us and each of us to the best of our ability who carry each other in this way and to give each other this space. So, happy teachers will change the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sven. Very much inspiring. I like all your metaphors you brought to us. Thank you so much. So we are ready to start a conversation. Who wants to start with a contribution, a remark, or a question? Then I would like to, if there's no question, I would like to ask, it is very much inspiring what you told about the Yellowstone school in India. And at one part of your speech, you said it would be a question if this could be easily transferred to a European situation. So I would like to ponder that a bit. How do you think about it? Is it a really special place of special people? It also has had a transformation, as I see, from a free school to a Waldorf school, but there is still some kind of a spirit there which is inspiring. And how do you see that relationship when you're questioning yourself? This might not be able to easily adapt to
Mhm.
a European situation.
I think it's a space that was created. It didn't naturally occur. It didn't just attract all these people to it. I think they worked very actively to create that kind of culture. And now any new teachers that come in, they come in partly because of that culture. They realize that there is something special going on there. Um, and maybe I could at this moment just briefly refer to the history because it's really quite striking. Um, the founder of the school, when she was a teenager herself, she read a book by a Japanese celebrity. This Japanese celebrity, when she was a little girl, um, was a hard to educate pupil. We would call her an ADHD pupil nowadays. She was asked to leave in several schools already as a 6 and 7 year old. And this was in Japan in the 1930s, and which was a very regimented, well, proto-fascist kind of society. And rather extraordinary, her parents found an independent school for her, which was based in railway wagons, abandoned railway wagons, only about 50 pupils or so, and an inspirational teacher who ran that school more or less by himself. And in that school, pupils could learn whatever they wanted to learn. And for the first time, this young girl was completely turned on to learning and to education. And she then became a professional. She became a teacher herself. Later on, she became a quiz show, no, a talk show host. So in England, that would be Michael Parkinson. In Germany, that would be Fuchsberger or someone like that. So a real celebrity. And when she was in her 70s already, she wrote her memoirs. And it was called The Little Girl by the Window. She called herself Toto-chan. And this was the book that this inspirational founder of the school read as a child herself and said, when I grow up, I'm going to make a school like that. And that's what she did 15 years ago. She started that, called it after this yellow train school. That very short-lived experiment, you can imagine, in Japan did not survive the Second World War. Yeah. But this founding vision, I guess, is really what sustains the half a dozen or so founding teachers who are still there. And the affinity to Waldorf is something that has just happened. They would call it a fortunate coincidence, maybe, or just maybe karma as well. I don't know. But this wonderful dynamic of this is where we do Waldorf and this is where we don't is something I find absolutely inspirational for Waldorf schools. So, in answer to your question, Joost, um, maybe we should ask ourselves slightly less, how can we be more Waldorf? And instead ask, how can we just be better at what we do? Because it's not the same thing. That's not the same question. And the longer I get into contact with initiatives like this, the more I understand that. Do you remember what Steiner said when he was asked for permission to found a Waldorf school in England? During the Ilkley course in 1923, the English colleagues came, or who weren't colleagues yet, there was no school yet, and they said, "Please, Dr. Steiner, we want to make a Waldorf school in England. What do we have to do?" And he said, one condition only, it must be a good school.
There are many questions around it. So the one question is where to get the inspirations, which are really still powerful and can connect a collegium. You often, when I have reflections with my students who started to become teachers, they start at schools very much inspired, very much looking forward to that wonderful profession and everything. But after 1 year, 2 years, they are a bit not frustrated, but they have doubts about if they are powerful enough to deal with all the obstacles
Yeah.
and to really deal with that the school doesn't give them enough space or enough protection, whatever. So they expect something from the school, from the collegium, maybe from the parents. So with the children, it's always a good connection, but it's not very much connected to the governance of the school. Maybe it's connected to the colleagues, but to the way of governance, sometimes there's a problem. And the way how to, they are a bit challenged too much how to deal with the parents. So there is a social conflict which takes away the force and power
Yeah.
to do good schoolwork. And this leads into they questioning themselves, how long can I do it? How long do I still have the power? Where can I find, how can I make my inspirations lively enough to overcome those obstacles? And then they have the experience, they fail in doing something together with the other colleagues. This is, this is one aspect I always hear from my students. And what you say that they have this, you said that imagine having in Europe a situation, you take 30 days of your vacation time to be in school. Yes, this is a real decision. Um, Maybe it's not a good advice to do it in Europe, but nevertheless, it's a real question for Waldorf schools that the place in itself supports you and does not take your strengths.
Yeah.
Yes, a rather different approach from the last few words you uttered. But I was taken sort of by the middle of your talk where you were talking about the sage on the stage and the guide on the side. And this idea that permeated what you said, that it's not what we teach, right? It's not the content of what we teach, it's how we teach. And also, there's another writer who talks about the hidden agenda of how we approach teaching. And you spoke very clearly about how we approach the organization of a classroom, the physical organization of a classroom, and the message that that gives the students, that we're kind of all there together. It's not a question, and it's not anything new that I want to bring. I just want to emphasize this idea of the hidden message that we give our students, and the way we can enculturate them in a very good way that will then spill out into the community. And I think I've said this notion before that really lives in me, that education is both product and producer of the society we live in, and how we can affect that change just by the way we arrange the desks in the classroom. There's a small slice of change that we can bring. Thank you for that.
Mm.
Dorothy?
Thank you, Sven. Yeah, I want just to connect to your contribution, Elizabeth. I think it's always, or often, we got stuck in the form.
Yeah.
I mean, the moving classroom is not the solution if the teacher is not working just out of his own experience. So it could be sitting in the row and could be very moving, and you could have a moving classroom and it's chaotic and nothing happens. So I think it's not, it helps have ideas in different forms, but all depends on the teacher and the situation you find with the children, with the parents. And I think this is a question, and it's not easy to solve it because you find so different situations and always the being together. I mean, and you know this school as well, the Yellow Train School, and there's really a community. They work together. And this is what you can feel. And I know other schools also in Europe, if you are able to do this and just accept your colleague and work together and see, oh, you do it different than me. Okay, that's fine. So this is the first step, being a good school and being a good teacher and doing it better. It's just not, yeah, all the forms, but we can work together and change our ideas and experience. And it could be that one does it like this and the other one does it different, and it works as well.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
thank you
I
for
have to,
all this. Yeah.
yeah, I have to agree with that. If I may just briefly respond, that I think being a handwork teacher, right, we also know that the physical affects the way we feel, and the way we feel and think affects our physical. So it's a stream in many different directions.
Yeah.
I think as a new teacher, I felt very, very overwhelmed when I was told that I was a kindergarten nap teacher, sort of an assistant, and I was told blankly that as if I could clean up my inner life, the children would go to sleep much more easily. And that really didn't work for me. It was too big of a step. But when I was told that the main teacher was in the room next door and she would come in and help if I needed it, it worked fine. They all went to sleep just fine. So it's a multi-directional thing, I think. Thank you, Dorothy, for bringing that to.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, great.
Sven, is there some last remark from your side?
No, that's all right.
Okay. So then again, I thank you very much for this marvelous contribution. It was a valuable finish for this series of lectures. Thank you so much. And this is the end for this 24 series of lectures, and we will offer it again the next autumn. It's still in the open what will be the topic. I will have talks with many people about it, and we have time to plan it way ahead. But definitely we will start in 25 in September again, a new series. And I would like to thank, first of all, of course, all contributors and lecturers who gave us the lectures, which are still available online. And of course, very much many thanks to the audience, to all of you participating from all over the world and yeah, creating this space of community for us with our questions. And I wish you a good Christmas time and all the best for the next year. And I hope to see one or the other next year at a conference wherever we can meet. All the best to you, and thank you so much.